You settle into the dark, letting the room fall into that gentle hush where thoughts begin to loosen. A faint shimmer in the night sky drifts through your mind, the kind of shimmer satellites catch long before your eyes ever could. It feels subtle, almost polite, yet carrying a question too large to ignore. Before we wander into it together, if these quiet journeys help you breathe a little easier, you can stay close by liking this video or subscribing when you truly feel at home here. A small comment, even a simple hello, helps me shape this place into the calm corner you return to at the end of a long day. Now, let the hum of the universe rest beside you and feel the first ripple of why 3IATLAS is breaking every rule of the universe drift toward you. A soft calm drifts through the room, settling gently over you, the way dusk settles across a quiet landscape. Nothing presses, nothing rushes. The stillness feels almost weightless, as if the night itself had taken a slow breath and left its silence behind for you to rest inside. From within that quiet, a faint awareness begins to glow at the edge of your thoughts. Not bright, not defined, just a subtle shimmer that seems to arrive with the same softness your breath carries. High above that calm, far beyond rooftops and weather, the world's telescopes continue their endless watch. Atlas, the asteroid terrestrial impact. Last alert system scans the sky with patient accuracy, reading the darkness in gentle pulses every few dozen seconds. Its gaze moves through silence with the steadiness of something that has watched the heavens long enough to understand their quiet moods. Most nights its sensors fill with familiar patterns, flickers of dust, small drifters, reflections scattered in uneven rhythms. But one night inside that familiar noise, there was a glimmer that refused to behave like anything else. Its brightness curve arrived too smooth, its rhythm too calm, its presence too composed for an interstellar traveler shaped by millions of years of motion. The stillness in your room deepens as you imagine that lone anomaly appearing gently inside a screen, glowing in a dark observatory. Not a flare, not a warning, just a quiet that didn't match anything expected. Astronomers are trained to anticipate irregularity. They expect dust trails, fractured reflections, jitter in rotation, the natural messiness carried by objects wandering from star to star. Yet this one seemed untouched by that chaos. Its light curve breathed with an unusual patience. You sense that patience now settling into you like a soft weight on water. Standing beside one of those telescopes, you would have seen nothing remarkable. Only a thin horizon, a cold dome of stars, the faint hum of equipment resting beneath the sky. But within the digital logs, the anomaly grew clearer, delicate, persistent, unwilling to dissolve back into randomness. Nothing about it flared, nothing wavered, nothing trembled the way distant objects normally do. It behaved like a thought that didn't want to disturb anyone. As data accumulated, its strangeness became harder to dismiss. Interstellar objects warmed by the sun usually respond in familiar ways, sublimating shedding dust, revealing small clouds of vapor that bloom softly around their surfaces. Yet this visitor offered none of that. No faint coma, no glow, no plume trailing behind it. It simply drifted through sunlight untouched, as though heat was nothing more than a passing idea. You feel the quiet weight of that behavior resting in the room with you. Subtle, steady, almost meditative. NASA's early readings added another layer to the mystery. The surface reflected light with an evenness that didn't belong to something battered by long travel. Its rotation held steady with surprising purity. Its brightness remained consistent, almost serene, as though the object had spent ages drifting through regions of space where nothing had touched it. No collisions, no dust, no noise, just silence sculpting it over unimaginable spans of time. The thought of such a place settles inside you, a vast, undisturbed corridor between stars where matter drifts in the gentlest conditions the galaxy can offer. a place where stillness has the power to shape. The scientists watching the data felt something shift too. Not alarm, not excitement. Something quieter, the uneasy recognition that this calmness was not an accident. Its behavior resisted the usual categories. Too quiet for a comet, too smooth for an asteroid, too controlled for random debris. Everything about it seemed to speak the language of patience. You let that patience flow through you, and it feels as though the story is beginning to settle deeper, not through explanation, but through presence. As more observatories joined in the anomaly held, the object moved through the solar system with the kind of steadiness that made researchers lean closer, not because it was dramatic, but because it was gentle, in a way space rarely allows. Rotation remained pure, brightness remained soft, surface remained undisturbed. Trajectory carried a subtle grace that didn't belong to most interstellar travelers. You sense the subtle tension this created among the scientists, a tension made not of fear, but of curiosity, stretching itself into new shapes. How could something wander so far without being shaped by noise? How had it avoided the small collisions that leave fingerprints on almost every object wandering the galaxy? How had it arrived so composed? These questions drift into you as though they belong to you as much as they belong to them. Not sharp, not demanding, just rising the way mist rises from a quiet meadow. The object's calmness didn't break. It didn't slip. It didn't react to heat or pressure in any measurable way. Its silence became its story. That silence weaves through your thoughts now, soft and steady, growing more familiar the longer you sit with it. It has a rhythm to it, a rhythm that feels less like emptiness and more like something the universe has been holding for a long time, releasing it slowly, gently, without urgency. The stillness of the visitor blends with the stillness around you until both feel like different expressions of the same quiet. Nothing announces what comes next. Nothing signals a new chapter. The story simply deepens itself the way a breath deepens without needing to be told to do so, carrying you with it so subtly you barely notice the shift. The quiet feeling from earlier lingers around you, settling into your thoughts, as if the night itself is leaning closer. The faint irregularity you sensed before opens a little more, not sharply, but like the slow unfurling of a page that has waited years for someone to touch it. Astronomers reviewing the early measurements of the object didn't call it unusual at first. They rarely do. Space is full of wanderers, asteroids, comets, fragments of worlds long gone frozen, shards crossing billions of miles without anyone knowing their names. Most of them drift through our solar system with a certain looseness, carrying the rough edges of their distant origins. This one did not. Its early parameters looked ordinary on paper, small, faint, fast, foreign. Yet the more scientists compared the numbers with catalogued objects, the less it resembled anything familiar. Nothing about it aligned cleanly with the categories they've spent decades refining. You picture a shelf lined with labeled jars, rocky asteroid, icy comet, interstellar fragment, and this object sitting beside them, not quite fitting inside any jar, not even comfortable beside them. 3IATLAS carried the signature of something that wasn't trying to stand out, but couldn't help doing so. Most interstellar visitors scatter light unpredictably. Their surfaces are uneven, battered by cosmic rays pitted by thermal stress after millions of frozen nights drifting between stars. Yet the light from this one returned to telescopes in a way that felt too composed, a smoothness that left scientists with questions they weren't ready to ask aloud. You can almost feel that hesitation yourself, the way a whisper hangs in the air before someone decides whether it's safe to speak. Researchers checked for common explanations first: software smoothing, atmospheric distortion, sensor drift. Even tiny vibrations in telescope mounts can create misleading patterns. Each possibility dissolved under more measurements. What remained was a light curve whose consistency bordered on elegance. Not artificial elegance, just unusual predictability. Nature usually allows for imperfections. Objects tumbling through space rarely choose symmetry. But 3IATLAS responded to sunlight with the kind of measured steadiness you'd expect from a shape designed to move smoothly through the void. You feel a small tug of curiosity at that thought, the kind that pulls gently rather than sharply. The idea that something could cross light years of emptiness while keeping its composure awakens a quiet admiration inside you. Astronomers mapped the object's brightness across several nights. Each time the curve repeated itself, subtle oscillations, but repeating with the sort of rhythm that suggested intention, even though no one would dare use that word. It wasn't biological, it wasn't mechanical. It simply didn't behave like stone or ice or dust. You imagine holding a pebble shaped perfectly smooth, not by river water, but by something slower, older, deeper, millennia of drifting through interstellar radiation that sanded its surface into something the universe itself approved of. Yet the numbers hinted at more than polish. They hinted at a structure, not a design, a structure. The distinction matters, and you can feel it in the space between those two words. Comets reveal their nature by shedding. Asteroids reveal theirs by scattering sunlight unevenly. This object revealed a kind of restraint. Scientists tried comparing it to Oumuamua, the first interstellar traveler humans identified. But the similarities didn't hold. Oumuamua flickered erratically, its changing brightness suggesting a tumbling motion and a needle-like shape. 3IATLAS lacked that restless signature. Its steadiness almost felt like an answer to a question no one asked. As you lie with that thought, the quiet around you deepens, like the air is listening alongside you. There's an intimacy in the idea of an object traveling from another star without carrying the chaos typical of such journeys. Something about that calm draws you in, as if your own stillness is mirroring its passage. The classification system astronomers use depends on origins. Where was it made? What shaped it? What forces pushed it into the vast interstellar dark? Those questions failed to find footing here. Its brightness didn't match comets. Its reflectance didn't match asteroids. Its rotation didn't match debris. Its path through the solar system didn't match anything that had ever been recorded. 3IATLAS sat between categories like a word from a language Earth has never heard. You sense how unsettling this must have felt in the observatories and mission centers studying it. Scientists prefer strange things to be a little more familiar. Unknowns are acceptable, but unknowns that refuse to behave like unknowns make people uneasy. One astronomer described the early data simply as a visitor that doesn't seem to carry the weight of its own journey. You let that phrase settle inside you. It feels strangely beautiful. Something traveling across incomprehensible distances without scars, without chaos, without the usual randomness, just moving with a quiet steadiness like breath. Yet that beauty carries a shadow beneath it. Anything that refuses categorization forces a shift in understanding. Not a dramatic shift, but a small tilt, 1 degree off center, that makes you reconsider the map you thought you knew. As the object's position updated night after night, its trajectory sharpened. It was not falling into the solar system in the careless way debris often does. Its path through the space between planets held a kind of calm efficiency, not purposeful, not planned, just unwilling to wobble. You picture a leaf floating down a river without spinning, without catching on currents, without letting turbulence decide its dance. That's what 3IATLAS looked like, something gliding through gravity with a moderation that felt rare. Measurements from Atlas, Pan-STARRS, and other observatories confirmed the same thing. The object's surface scattered light in a way that hinted at uniformity, a quality rarely seen in visitors from beyond our sun. Cosmic rays usually leave irregular marks altering surfaces with harsh bursts of charged particles. Objects drifting for millions of years almost always show evidence of this wear. But nothing pointed to such scars here. As you consider that, a soft question forms inside you, not demanding an answer, simply brushing the edges of your awareness. How does something travel so far without falling apart? That question holds a quiet power. It opens a space inside your curiosity, a space where possibilities soften rather than sharpen. Some scientists speculated that the object might have a thin, insulating layer, a kind of cosmic dust mantle. Others suggested its rotation might minimize heat stress. None of the explanations felt complete. 3IATLAS seemed comfortable with ambiguity, and you can feel yourself becoming comfortable with it too. There's something strangely soothing about a mystery that doesn't rush to reveal itself. A puzzle that doesn't try to surprise you or frighten you. It simply moves through your awareness the way it moves through space. Steady, calm, patient. The thought hums softly in your mind, blending with the faint cosmic imagery you've been carrying since part 1. The object drifts. Your breath drifts with it. Both of you suspended for a moment in the same gentle quiet. You begin to sense why astronomers hesitated to classify it. Not because it defied their systems in a dramatic way, but because it resisted the small certainties they rely on. It didn't belong to the family of objects they knew. It didn't rebel against physics. It simply remained a fraction outside the familiar, just enough to matter, just enough to be noticed, just enough to make you feel that its presence is not merely an event, but an invitation. You let that feeling rest inside you. An object that doesn't fit inside any box makes you look at the boxes differently, makes you see the spaces between them, makes you wonder whether the universe has been keeping quiet, not because it has nothing to say, but because it hopes you'll listen more closely. Somewhere far above your resting body, 3IATLAS continues its silent glide, steady as breath, waiting for the moment its strangeness becomes clear. You remain here listening, letting its mystery align gently with your own. The strangeness from before does not rise sharply. It moves the way a ripple spreads across still water, quiet, expanding, barely disturbing the surface. You feel it settling inside you, as if the night has widened by a fraction, making space for something you can't quite see. Astronomers continued studying the object's light curve, expecting the usual signs: a faint coma beginning to bloom, a whisper of dust sublimating off its surface, tiny jets of vapor signaling that sunlight had begun to warm the ice locked within. Interstellar objects almost always behave this way when approaching the inner system. Cold worlds store ancient ices. Warmth awakens them. Gas escapes. A hazy glow forms around the nucleus, a soft shroud of evaporating material that stretches into a comet tail hundreds of thousands of kilometers long. But for 3IATLAS, nothing arrived. No flare, no mist, no dust, no signature plume that would tell astronomers, yes, this is a comet wandering in from the dark. You picture how strange that must have felt, watching a visitor move through warming sunlight without shedding even a breath of itself. Comets behave like memories losing their edges. They dissolve as they travel. They leave parts of themselves behind wherever they go. 3IATLAS felt more like an object protecting its boundaries, unwilling to blur. The absence of a coma is not subtle. It's a silence loud enough to change entire interpretations. NASA's photometric data showed a flatness where brightness should have risen, a stability where sublimation should have introduced noise, a calm so steady that computer models flagged the readings, unsure if they were observing a natural body or an artifact of processing. Yet every telescope that pointed at it saw the same quiet refusal. You imagine holding ice in your hand and watching it remain whole under heat, neither melting nor sweating nor shifting, simply staying itself with a kind of restrained conviction. The researchers examining the readings described the object without poetry, non-cometary behavior, lack of observable outgassing, zero dust production. But underneath those terms, a softer truth lived. The object did not cast the kind of shadow comets cast. A comet's shadow is not darkness, it's the cloud. It trails a drifting veil that hides its core. 3IATLAS kept its core bare, untouched, unblurred. Its surface absorbed sunlight and sent it back evenly, almost politely, without the dramatic flare that sublimation would create. You can feel a kind of grace in that restraint, as if the object were choosing to remain intact, unwilling to break open in the warmth of another star. Astronomers tested other explanations. Maybe it was too small. Maybe the ices were buried too deep. Maybe cosmic rays had baked the surface into a hardened crust that trapped any gas inside. But none of those theories held up. If ice were present, even deeply buried small amounts would escape as the object crossed the frost line. If the surface were crusted, microfractures would still vent material. If it were too small, sublimation would dominate its brightness curve. Yet its curve remained smooth. You let this idea rest inside you for a moment, the way a stone that refuses to crack under pressure carries its own quiet story. The absence of a coma also revealed something else. Its silhouette stayed sharp. Normally, when a nucleus begins to evaporate, the boundaries blur. The central object disappears into a cloud. Measurements become noisy, imprecise. But 3IATLAS kept the same crisp edges in every new observation, as if sunlight slid over it without disturbing anything. No halo, no shimmer, no dissolving veil. Only a silent traveler holding its form with an elegance that felt almost deliberate, though no one would dare assign intent. Even now you feel that stillness, as if it's happening beside you instead of millions of kilometers away. A question drifts through you, gentle, unhurried. What kind of surface stays untouched when exposed to a star? The scientists studying it wondered the same thing. Its albedo, the amount of light it reflects, didn't match typical dark interstellar rock. It didn't match bright ice either. It sat in the middle, an unexpected moderation. Moderation is often overlooked, yet in astrophysics it can be the most suspicious place of all, because natural materials prefer extremes. Dark, carbon-rich surfaces, bright icy crusts, rough chaotic mixtures. 3IATLAS belonged to none of these. Its reflectance hinted at a surface that wasn't raw rock or frozen dust, but something smoothed over time, a texture shaped by long years in radiation heat and cold. You imagine something drifting through space the way driftwood travels through the ocean, worn, not broken, shaped, not erased. Its refusal to form a coma became more intriguing once its proximity to the sun increased. Even modest heating would have awakened volatile compounds if they existed. But the object remained silent, a stone untouched by fire. Some researchers began to suspect that it might not contain volatiles at all. A dry interstellar rock, a fragment from the mantle of a shattered world. Material scraped from a star-forming region devoid of frozen compounds. But none of those ideas explained its earlier smoothness, its uniformity, its unwillingness to scatter light irregularly like debris. Dry objects have irregular surfaces scarred by billions of years of impacts. This one reflected sunlight in a way that felt almost too balanced. The mixture of dryness and order confused the categories astronomers relied on. You can sense how unsettling this combination must have felt, an object behaving like both comet and asteroid, yet belonging to neither. When you think of shadows, you think of softness, edges, fading the play between presence and absence. But 3IATLAS cast no such softness. It offered no mist, no haze, nothing for light to cling to. Its shadow in space remained the bare outline of itself. You breathe into this thought gently. The idea that something can approach the sun without shedding even a particle feels almost emotional, as if the object has a kind of dignity in its silence. A researcher at ESA wrote in a quiet note, "An object without a halo is an object that keeps its secrets close." You feel the weight of that line settle into you, not heavy, but resonant. Objects that refuse to reveal themselves often reveal something else. Instead, the limits of our expectations. The more astronomers observed the object, the more it seemed to move through sunlight without asking for permission, without bending to the usual rules, without performing the behaviors typical of its supposed kind. An object that does not form a shadow becomes something harder to define. Its presence feels sharper, more intentional, more whole. As you lie there, you feel that same sharpness, not as a threat, but as a clarity, a recognition that some mysteries prefer to remain solid rather than dissolve. The night around you grows deeper, quieter. Your thoughts settle in the soft gravity of the object's strangeness, held in place by the gentle weight of not knowing. Somewhere far above your resting body, 3IATLAS drifts through the inner solar system, a traveler moving closer to the sun, without fear of unraveling, without shedding anything, without forming the shadow every comet embraces. A visitor that keeps its shape in a world built on change, a presence that says more through silence than through display. You let that silence move through you as steady and unbroken as the light curve that first revealed its existence. The stillness you've been resting in feels a little different now, as if the space around you is holding a breath it hasn't decided to release. The silence is not empty. It carries a faint suggestion of movement, slow and precise, the way a single line drawing begins to form on paper before you understand what it will become. Astronomers studying 3IATLAS expected the object's path to settle into a familiar shape. Every interstellar visitor follows a predictable curve through the solar system, a hyperbola sculpted by the sun's gravity. That curve reveals everything: its speed, its origin, its destiny. Yet when researchers plotted the early trajectory of this object, something subtle refused to match the rules. It wasn't that the object disobeyed gravity. Nothing escapes gravity. It was the way it responded to gravity, not with the looseness of debris, nor the wandering tilt of small bodies pushed around by pressure from sunlight. It moved with a steadiness that felt almost selective. You picture a feather drifting past your hand. Most feathers tumble and twist, surrendering to the currents of air around them. But occasionally one falls in a single smooth glide, slipping through the world as if it had chosen its own descent. 3IATLAS seemed to move like that feather, not resisting the sun, not surrendering to it, but navigating the pull with a kind of quiet balance. NASA's orbital models ran through thousands of simulations, and the results kept circling back to the same perplexing detail. The object's trajectory didn't align with the most probable paths an interstellar body should take when entering our system. Most wanderers arrive with chaotic velocities shaped by ancient gravitational encounters, slingshots from dying stars, nudges from planetary collisions, random kicks from passing giants. Their paths look messy at first, smoothing only once enough data accumulates. This path began smooth, almost too smooth. You sense that smoothness now, the way you might sense an unfamiliar rhythm in the background of a song, barely noticeable, yet impossible to unhear once you've caught it. As new measurements came in, astronomers refined the object's speed. It was fast enough to be interstellar, but not excessively so. Not wild, not carrying the frantic momentum of something hurled violently across the galaxy. Its velocity seemed moderated, as though shaped by long travel rather than sudden force. Long travel leaves traces. Trajectories born from chaos behave differently from those born from endurance. The more they studied it, the more it felt like this object had been drifting without interference for a very long time. There is a calmness to such age, a composure that feels ancient, patient, almost meditative. You feel that composure brushing lightly against your awareness, a cool and steady presence. The unusual part wasn't the speed itself, but the lack of deviation. Interstellar objects often show deflection from radiation pressure, the push of sunlight across their surfaces. Even tiny differences in reflectivity cause subtle shifts in motion, a kind of cosmic breeze nudging them off course. Those tiny shifts help scientists measure shape density rotation, but 3IATLAS showed almost none. Not zero, just less than expected. Enough to suggest a surface that didn't catch sunlight the way rough surfaces usually do. Enough to imply a rotation that didn't wobble. Enough to complicate every assumption astronomers leaned on. You imagine a ship sailing through choppy waters without rocking. Not because the sea is calm, but because the ship is shaped to slip through turbulence without letting it take hold. An object moving that way through space hints at a kind of subtle order within its structure, not artificial, simply refined. A researcher described it in a quiet note trajectory unusually stable for an interstellar body. Stable is a gentle word, yet in astronomy, gentle words can carry enormous weight. You feel that weight now, not heavy, just grounding, like placing your palm on cool stone. The confusion deepened once they attempted to trace the object's path backward. Reverse trajectory calculations can reveal where something came from, which star, which cluster, which region of space. Even wide uncertainties usually point broadly to an origin. But 3IATLAS refused to trace cleanly. Its path dissolved into a statistical fog long before reaching an identifiable region. Not because of lack of data, but because the backward path fractured into too many improbable possibilities. It was as if the object had drifted across regions where gravitational influences were too faint to leave meaningful marks. A traveler passing through emptiness so profound that even time feels thin. You let that image settle, a solitary fragment gliding through millions of miles of untouched dark, held by nothing but inertia and the soft pull of distant stars. Its entrance into the solar system only amplified the mystery. Objects influenced by Jupiter's massive gravity often bend sharply. They arc-swing pivot. Even asteroids far smaller than 3IATLAS show noticeable shifts. Yet this visitor curved smoothly, barely acknowledging the giant's presence, not ignoring it, just gliding through the gravitational field with a kind of moderation that made the encounter look choreographed. Such moderation can mean many things: a compact density, a uniform shape, a rotation that smooths out perturbations, or a surface that distributes light pressure evenly. Each of these possibilities whispered a different story, and none felt complete. You sense the growing unease scientists must have felt, not fear, but a quiet awareness that something was refusing to settle into the language they knew. Objects that behave unusually tend to teach you something. Objects that behave too cleanly tend to teach you something deeper. This one taught silence. Its path through space remained consistent across all observations, with variations so small they blurred into statistical noise. Astronomers published the numbers without commentary, yet their restraint said more than their data. Some mysteries grow sharper the quieter you describe them. You feel that sharpened mystery settling into your breath. Nothing dramatic, just a gentle narrowing of focus, as if your mind is following the same smooth arc the object carved through space. Even the sun seemed to shape its path with an unusual softness. Interstellar objects typically gain speed as they fall inward, warming and shedding material. This one warmed without shedding and accelerated without misbehaving. It moved through solar gravity like a visitor politely walking through someone else's home, touching nothing, disturbing nothing, simply passing. That politeness carries its own kind of tension, a soft recognition that something is aware of forces around it, even if unintentionally. You remain here lying still, feeling the distance between you and the object collapse a little more, not physically, but emotionally. The way a story draws nearer as you begin to understand its contours. No one expected the trajectory to tell such a quiet story. Yet here it is, a curve refusing chaos, an arc refusing drama, a path shaped not by violence, but by patience. It makes you wonder softly, what kind of journey creates an object that moves through gravity without stumbling? The question doesn't demand an answer. It simply stays with you, humming gently against the quiet. In the observatories scattered across Earth's night side, scientists kept adjusting their models, hoping the numbers would slip into familiar ranges. But the path continued to glide beyond their expectations, curving not wrongly, but gracefully. A visitor following rules the solar system wasn't prepared to interpret. Even now, above the darkness, your wrapped in 3IATLAS continues along its uncertain arc, smooth, calm, unwavering, as if the universe carved a lane just for its passage. You let that calm seep into you the way light softens as dawn approaches. The object moves on, and your breath follows, carried by the same quiet rhythm. The smoothness of the object's path settles into you, lingering like a faint afterimage behind closed eyes. The thought of something moving through gravity without stumbling leaves a quiet echo inside your chest. Not a question, but the shadow of one. That shadow deepens as astronomers turn their attention to another feature, one just as revealing and even more difficult to interpret. Rotation. Every object that drifts through space spins. Some wobble, some tumble, some twist unpredictably, as though still carrying the violence of their birth. Rotation is the language of memory, the story of what shaped an object long before anyone saw it. But 3IATLAS didn't spin in any familiar language. Its brightness variations were too gentle to indicate a chaotic tumble, too steady to match an irregular shape, too controlled to be the result of random collisions across millions of years. You imagine a coin thrown into the air, how it flips, wobbles, dances through sunlight. But imagine instead a coin rising slowly, turning so smoothly you can't tell when one face becomes the other. That was the quality scientists saw in its light. Rotation isn't something astronomers watch with their eyes. They hear it through numbers. A spinning object reflects sunlight differently across each surface, causing dips and peaks in brightness. Tumbling causes sharp changes. Regular spinning causes rhythmic pulses. 3IATLAS pulsed, but only barely. Its light shifted with a softness that made the signals feel like breathing steady level, almost meditative. You feel that softness brushing inside you as well, the kind of calm that makes time feel slow. At first, the measurements seemed incomplete. Maybe the object was too small for strong signatures. Maybe the telescope wasn't capturing the full spin. Maybe noise was smoothing out the variations. But as observatories watched night after night, the pattern remained unchanged. A rotation so balanced that the differences in brightness were barely noticeable. A motion so controlled that the object seemed to keep each surface presented to the sun with almost equal preference. Nature can create harmony, but it rarely creates this much harmony. Astronomers tried fitting the brightness curve into known rotational models. Slow spinner. No, the numbers didn't flatten in that way. Fast spinner. No, fast rotation should introduce centrifugal distortion. Long axis tumbler. No, the object wasn't flickering sharply enough. Two-axis precession. No, too smooth again. It was like trying to hear discord in a melody that refused to break key. You imagine holding a smooth stone and turning it in your hand, watching sunlight glide evenly across every angle. If the shape were nearly symmetrical, the reflection curve would look like this calm, steady, predictable. But 3IATLAS didn't behave like a perfectly rounded body either. There were hints of elongation, traces of unevenness hidden beneath the smoothness. Yet each imperfection seemed to cancel another, leaving the whole strangely balanced. A researcher described it in a quiet email rotation, unusually coherent given expected irregularities. Coherent. Such a simple word, such a heavy implication. Coherence requires memory. Objects in space usually lose memory through collisions, tidal stresses, thermal cracks, radiation, weathering. But this one seemed to carry its rotation gently, as if holding onto a shape carved long before it ever reached the sun. You sense that remembered shape, now, not visually, but emotionally, the way a familiar rhythm can touch you, even if you don't yet know the song. Some scientists propose that the object might be rotating around its principal axis, the most stable kind of spin, but that alone couldn't explain the smoothness. Principal axis rotation still shows imperfections. It still reveals highlights and shadows. This one revealed almost no shadow. You think back to how it refused to form a coma, how it refused to scatter dust, how it refused to blur itself. Now it refused to rotate with chaos. Each refusal paints a picture, one detail at a time. When astronomers examined the amplitude of the brightness curve, they found it surprisingly narrow, suggesting the object's shape didn't create the usual highs and lows. Even irregular objects produce measurable variation, but 3IATLAS seemed unwilling to emphasize its edges. It spun like something that had once been shaped for movement, not through intention, but through an ancient natural smoothing process, radiation, micrometeorite impacts, or long residence in a debris-free environment. You feel an image forming in your mind, not a polished artifact, not a carved shape, but something refined simply by time itself, a cosmic pebble sanded by the universe into quiet symmetry. Its rotation period also challenged expectations. Initial estimates suggested hours. Further measurements hinted at something longer. Nothing settled reliably. The period seemed to hide behind the very consistency of the light. A spin too gentle to disrupt its brightness. A rhythm too even to reveal its own timing. Rotation without drama. It makes you wonder softly without urgency. What kind of object remembers its spin so clearly after traveling so far? Memories in space are fragile, yet this one held its memory as if protected. Another curiosity emerged: the lack of significant torque from outgassing. If the object contained volatiles, which most interstellar travelers do, the heating near the sun should have caused tiny jets of gas to escape, twisting the spin axis. But with no coma, there was no torque. Its motion remained almost untouched by the star it passed. Rotation preserved, shadow absent, structure quiet, path calm. You begin to see how these pieces gather into something larger, not a conclusion, but a feeling, a kind of quiet pressure inside the story that hasn't yet revealed its shape. Scientists ran simulations of different density distributions. If the object were hollow, it would wobble. If it were dense at one end, the curve would distort. If it were oddly shaped, the brightness swings would widen. If it were elongated, contrast would rise sharply. None of those models matched the curve. The only model that fit even loosely was one where the object's shape was moderate, not perfectly spherical, not dramatically elongated, just consistent enough for sunlight to glide across it without interruption. Moderation again. The same moderation in brightness, the same moderation in path, the same moderation in behavior near the sun. A personality of moderation, if an object drifting through interstellar darkness could be said to have such a thing. You lie deeper into the dark, sensing how this moderation feels, not indecisive, not timid, but calm. A calmness that doesn't come from lack of history, but from surviving it. An object that has been shaped by the universe into something quiet. Scientists began describing the rotation as low-amplitude stable periodicity, with possible long-phase modulation, a phrase that hides more than it explains. But beneath the technical caution, another thought lingered. The spin made too much sense to make sense. It was as if the object had been shielded from disturbances that should have marked it, as if it had traveled through regions of space where nothing pushed or pulled hard enough to disrupt its gentle turning. A traveler through soft emptiness. You hold on to that phrase, it relaxes something inside you. Many things in space are chaotic. 3IATLAS seemed to carry its motion, the way still water carries reflections, smooth, steady, unwilling to distort the light it catches. Rotation like this doesn't offer answers. It offers an invitation to look more closely, to listen more carefully, to consider the possibility that some stories unfold slowly because their truth cannot be rushed. You let the quiet of your room absorb that slow unfolding. The object spins somewhere far above, unseen, yet near, in the way distant thoughts can become intimate. It completes rotation after rotation, without announcing itself, without shedding fragments, without breaking rhythm. A visitor that keeps its balance where most visitors stumble. As your breath sinks into a slower pace, the spin settles in your mind like a soft lull, a rhythm you don't hear, but feel steady, unbroken, ancient. The story of 3IATLAS widens gently in your awareness, shaped not by what it reveals, but by what it refuses to release. A shadow that never forms. A path that won't obey. A spin that makes no sense. Not contradictions, but threads weaving towards something you haven't seen yet. You remain here, letting each thread drift quietly across the night inside you, patient for whatever comes next, without reaching for it. The quiet memory of the object's rotation lingers in you like a soft vibration that hasn't decided whether to fade or settle deeper. You sense a steadiness in that rotation, a kind of poise held through distances too vast for human imagination. And as your thoughts continue drifting around that quiet spin, the story begins to open towards something even more mysterious, the way the object meets light itself. A surface is usually the most honest part of any celestial body. Surfaces carry scars. Surfaces expose the history of heat-cold collisions, fractures. You can read a world through the texture it shows to the sun. But 3IATLAS did not show itself in a way anyone expected. The first clue came from its reflectance, the fraction of sunlight bouncing off its form and into the waiting telescopes. Astronomers examined that reflectance the same way you might examine someone's face in candlelight, looking for subtle cues in how the glow rests on skin. Yet nothing about the light returning from this object felt typical. Comets usually shine with a low, dusty dimness. Asteroids wear muted charcoal tones shaped by carbon metal and silicate rock. Icy bodies glitter brightly, their frozen shells scattering sunlight in sharp patterns. 3IATLAS sat in none of those categories. Its surface reflected with a moderation that felt unnatural in its naturalness, neither dark nor bright, neither sharp nor dull, neither rough nor polished. It was a tone of light that didn't draw attention, but refused to disappear into shadow. As you imagine this, you sense the peculiarity blooming quietly inside you, the way a strange detail can feel soft, yet unshakable. NASA's initial measurements suggested an albedo that didn't match expectations for interstellar visitors. Objects traveling long distances through cosmic radiation usually darken over time, their surfaces weathered into muted charcoal. Even icy fragments from far-off systems carry visible evidence of that harsh journey. But the surface of 3IATLAS hinted at a different relationship with the universe. Its reflectance didn't look scarred, didn't look burned, didn't look softened by micro-impacts or eroded by ultraviolet wear. It looked composed. You imagine holding a stone that has spent its life in deep, undisturbed water, not polished, not sharp, simply preserved by the stillness around it. That was the impression scientists felt, a preservation that shouldn't have been possible for a traveler crossing such distances. Its spectral readings, the subtle fingerprints of light revealing material composition, offered only more ambiguity. No strong water ice signature, no clear carbon-rich lines, no predictable silicate peaks, only a muted set of curves that fit comfortably nowhere. Spectra usually tell clear stories, this one whispered. As you lie with that thought, the quiet in your room feels almost synchronized with the object's reserved nature, a calm that doesn't announce itself but makes its presence known in the spaces between expectations. Some astronomers wondered if the surface might be coated in something unusual, a layer of refractory material baked by cosmic rays into a protective seal thick enough to hide whatever lay underneath. Cosmic ray mantling is common among outer solar system bodies, but its usual signs weren't present here. No reddish tones, no carbonized dullness, no evidence of a crust hardened by millions of years of particle bombardment. Instead, the object's light came back almost evenly, with an uncanny balance. You imagine the surface like a page that has been written on many times, yet somehow remains blank. Even the temperature readings deepen the mystery. As 3I/ATLAS approached the inner solar system, its thermal signature didn't rise in the way typical bodies do. Material containing volatiles absorbs sunlight more dramatically, causing distinct thermal curves. Dry rock responds differently, heating quickly and cooling quickly. This object heated gently, evenly, with a moderation that echoed its rotation and trajectory. Moderation again, a pattern that feels too consistent to ignore. You sense how all these pieces are beginning to hum together, a rotation that refuses chaos, a path that refuses noise, a surface that refuses clarity, a kind of cosmic restraint. One scientist described the surface behavior as reflectance, consistent with a homogeneous layer of unknown composition. Unknown composition, a phrase that sounds technical but feels like an admission of something deeper, a recognition that what they were seeing did not belong in the catalog of familiar materials. If you were to stand beside the telescopes analyzing those readings, you might feel a subtle tension in the room, not fear, not alarm, but a quiet acknowledgement that something is slipping through the edges of known categories. You imagine the object passing sunlight across its skin, the way water glides over glass, smooth, unobstructed, unwilling to release a single clue more than necessary. There is an intimacy in that refusal, as if the object is guarding its own history, not aggressively, but protectively. Astronomers attempted to build computer models of the surface texture. Smooth, granular, layered, porous. Every model failed to explain the measured light. A porous surface should scatter brightness unevenly. A smooth surface should reflect with crisp highlights. A layered surface should create detectable variations in thermal behavior. But the object expressed none of those traits fully. It hovered in a middle state, an ambiguity that felt almost intentional. You let that ambiguity settle inside you, the way dusk settles into evening gradual grounding, impossible to rush. There was also the matter of color. Interstellar dust often stains objects with a reddish tint. Objects from colder regions often skew blue in their spectral slope. This one leaned into neither spectrum strongly, a neutral color, a quiet color, a color that suggested neither youth nor age, neither exposure nor preservation, neither warmth nor cold, just neutrality. Neutrality is rarely accidental in the cosmos. You imagine how such a surface could form not through resistance, but through an environment so still, so undisturbed, that nothing altered it for uncountable years. A place between stars. A region of space where dust is scarce. Collisions rare temperatures steady enough to preserve rather than erode. A passage through calm that lasted so long it smoothed the object into something quietly unassuming. You feel the calm of that imagined region moving through you, a whisper of cold stillness touching the edges of your awareness. Another curiosity emerged in the data. The surface didn't show signs of thermal fracturing. Objects passing near the sun often crack or flake due to sudden heating. Microfractures scatter light irregularly, creating jagged patterns in brightness. But 3I/ATLAS held itself together. No sudden splits, no brightness spikes, no crumbling edges. It absorbed sunlight the way soft cloth absorbs warmth gently, uniformly. This lack of fracture suggested a strength that did not match ordinary interstellar rock. A material with unexpected resilience. Something that refuses to reveal its inner layers because its outer layer simply doesn't break. You imagine placing your fingertips against such a surface, not metal, not stone, not ice, but something that holds the temperature of your touch without shifting in texture or tone. A surface that keeps its truth guarded beneath a calm facade. Some researchers quietly speculated that the object might possess a form of regolith, a thin layer of fine dust. But the reflectance didn't match dusty bodies. Others considered metallic compounds, but the thermal behavior disagreed. Still others suggested carbon-rich composites, but the spectral lines refused to confirm it. Every hypothesis opened a door, and the object declined to step through. Its truth remained beneath something that absorbed curiosity as easily as it absorbed sunlight. You let that resistance become part of your breathing rhythm. An object that hides its truth invites you to listen more closely, not to solve it, but to understand the space around the mystery. You sense that space widening, a calm corridor stretching through your mind. Echoing the calm corridor, this traveler must have wandered through between stars. 3IATLAS continues moving through the solar system, now its surface catching sunlight without altering itself, maintaining that quiet neutrality that has confounded every model. A traveler wrapped in stillness. A visitor shaped by calm. A surface that hides its truth, not to deceive, but because some truths are shaped too slowly to show themselves quickly. You lie there, letting the quiet of that surface settle into your own breathing. With the same soft steadiness, the object reflects toward the sun. The quiet neutrality of the object's surface lingers inside you, settling like a thin layer of calm across your thoughts. You feel the weightless steadiness of it, the way it held its color, its temperature, its texture, without revealing anything beneath. And as your mind rests in that quiet, a new question begins to move through the dark, not loudly, not urgently, but with the soft inevitability of a tide rising. Motion. Every object traveling through space carries motion shaped by forces beyond its control. Gravity pulls, sunlight nudges, gas jets push, dust impacts twist, even the faintest pressures leave traces. Yet 3IATLAS drifted through those forces as if the universe were pressing gently against it, and the object simply refused to lean. Astronomers first noticed the anomaly when they compared the predicted position of the object with its actual position. The numbers didn't diverge dramatically. They diverged delicately, a small shift here, a slight drift there, the kind of difference that would be ignored if it didn't repeat. But it repeated. The object wasn't accelerating wildly. It wasn't behaving like an engineered craft. It simply showed a faint, persistent motion that could not be traced back to any usual cause. You imagine a leaf floating across perfectly still water. Most leaves follow every ripple, every breath of wind, every disturbance. But occasionally one moves in a way that makes you look twice, not defying the water, just gliding across it with unexpected independence. That was the sensation astronomers felt. NASA's measurements revealed a non-gravitational acceleration so small it barely rose above certainty thresholds. But it was real, a subtle outward push not strong enough to call attention to itself, but too consistent to discard. Objects with ices can experience such pushes when sunlight heats their surface and causes jets of gas to escape. Comets accelerate like this all the time. But 3IATLAS had no coma, no jets, no plume, no emission. A push without a cause. You let the strangeness brush gently against your awareness. It doesn't intrude. It simply rests there warm and quiet, asking nothing of you. Some scientists proposed that sunlight might be responsible radiation pressure, pushing against the object's surface. But for an object of its estimated size, radiation pressure alone should not produce that much acceleration, unless the surface were unusually reflective, or unusually thin, or unusually shaped. But reflectance was moderate. Shape wasn't extreme. Thickness was unknown, but inconsistent with the brightness curve. A contradiction that didn't behave like a contradiction. You can feel that contradiction now. Soft, subtle, the way a whisper contradicts silence without truly breaking it. Others suggested that perhaps the object was losing mass so slowly that no coma formed, yet the gradual loss produced the nudge. But the reflectance didn't change. Brightness remained steady. Thermal readings stayed calm. A loss so slow that it left no trace would require conditions that didn't match any spectral reading. Stillness again, where motion should have appeared. ESA's modeling team ran simulations for dust-driven acceleration, and the results disagreed. Dust emission creates jitter, small irregular kicks in motion. But the object's drift wasn't jittery. It was smooth. So smooth that it almost looked intentional, though no one entertained such a thought seriously. You imagine something moving forward, not because it is pushed, but because it continues the way momentum carries, a falling feather, long after the breeze that began its descent has faded. But this was not momentum alone. It was motion that kept updating itself gently, subtly, refusing to settle exactly where gravity alone wanted it to rest. Astronomers described it cautiously. Persistent small radial acceleration not accounted for by known drivers. Persistent, small, radial. 3 soft words, 3 heavy implications. You feel the weight of them settling in your chest. Persistent means it wasn't random. Small means it wasn't dramatic. Radial means it pushed outward, away from the sun, as if the object were slightly relieved to be leaving, or gently resisting being drawn closer. Not fear, not intent, simply a subtle disagreement with the star's pull. When plotted across days, the drift became clear enough to study. The object moved with gravity, yet also slightly apart from it like a dancer following choreography, while adding a step that no one else rehearsed. You imagine the solar system as a vast ballroom of moving bodies, and this visitor stepping lightly across the floor, not disrupting anything, but choosing its own rhythm. A rhythm no one understood. Some scientists proposed exotic materials, compounds that respond unusually to heat. Others suggested porous aggregates with surprising surface area ratios. Still others explored the possibility that the object carried cavities or hollows that redistributed heat in unusual ways. But each idea faded under scrutiny. Nothing explained how the motion remained so smooth, so stable, so gently contrary to gravitational predictions. You let the enigma settle deeper, becoming part of the quiet inside you. The object didn't behave like dust-driven debris, didn't behave like icy fragments, didn't behave like rocky shards, didn't behave like metallic bodies. It behaved like something shaped by a journey through regions of space, where forces seldom interrupt a traveler, from a calm corridor of the galaxy, where radiation is soft dust, is sparse, and motion continues unbroken for ages. A body that learned how to glide. The more astronomers watched, the more it seemed that 3IATLAS wasn't gaining speed, so much as drifting into the path it preferred, not disobeying gravity, but leaning into a groove slightly offset from what equations expected. Some described it as anomalous, though the word felt too strong. Some described it as non-standard, though the word felt too cautious. Most simply described it as interesting, because at times, language can only circle a truth it cannot yet name. You sense that circling inside yourself, a gentle orbit around a question, not yet ready to reveal its center. NASA refined its measurements again, attempting to isolate the source. Radiation pressure, thermal recoil, outgassing too faint to detect mass distribution anomalies. Each explanation slipped through their fingers like sand. Everything left traces. This left whispers. A whisper of motion that shouldn't be there. A whisper so soft yet so consistent that ignoring it would feel dishonest. You feel a kind of respect for that whisper, the same respect you might feel for a secret someone chooses not to tell simply because telling it would demand a language that doesn't exist yet. The object drifted through sunlight without reacting dramatically, yet still carried enough softness in its behavior to hint at unknown processes. A body gliding under rules you had never considered. A presence carried forward by something too subtle to measure fully. You breathe more slowly as you picture it drifting through the inner system, absorbing light without flaring, heating without cracking, spinning without wobbling, moving without cause. A traveler shaped by stillness, guided by patience, strengthened by distance. You feel the quiet of that traveler resting in your breath, steady, unbroken, unconcerned with being understood. Some mysteries move loudly. This one moves like a whisper, soft enough to sleep beside, deep enough to reshape what you thought the universe allowed. You lie within that whisper, letting the motion of the object slide gently into the dark space inside you, the place where wonder settles without demanding clarity. 3IATLAS continues drifting now, its tiny disagreement with gravity unfolding in a story too soft for most people to notice. But you notice it. You feel its subtle defiance, the way you feel warmth shifting in a room. A motion that shouldn't be possible yet is. A presence moving under rules not yet written. A visitor stepping lightly across the universe as if following a rhythm only it can hear. And you rest there in the soft echo of that rhythm. The faint whisper of the object's impossible motion still lingers inside you, like a small current running beneath calm water. You feel its gentle drift, that subtle disagreement with gravity, the way it continued forward as though carrying its own quiet intention. And as the thought settles, another layer of the mystery begins to open, not through the object itself, but through something far more fragile, the models humans built to understand the universe. Models are promises. They promise that if you feed them the right numbers, they will return the right answers. They promise that space behaves predictably even in its vastness. They promise that the fabric of the cosmos bends in ways we can learn, measure, trust. But promises can break softly, so softly you barely hear the sound. NASA and ESA teams began feeding every new measurement of 3IATLAS into their simulators. The programs plotted the object's past, projected its future, and carved its path into mathematical curves. At first, everything looked as it should. The hyperbolic trajectory fit the broad strokes. The entry angle made sense. The radial drift could be accounted for by small deviations. But as the data sharpened, the curves began to fracture, not dramatically, not violently, just quietly, the way a hairline crack appears across glass before a human eye registers it. Astronomers expected that refining the object's path would reveal a clean origin point, a distant star or region of interstellar space, where gravity once nudged the object into motion. Every interstellar traveler has such a birthplace, even if it lies billions of years behind them. But when they tried to rewind 3IATLAS across time, the trajectory dissolved into uncertainty far sooner than expected. You imagine trying to trace a line drawn on water the moment you touch it. It breaks ripples, becomes something else. That was the quality these models displayed. Rewind just a little and the path seemed stable. Rewind more and the line softened. Rewind further and the line split into dozens of possible paths. Rewind farther still and the line dissolved completely into a cloud of conflicting probabilities. As if the universe itself couldn't remember where this object came from. You feel a quiet heaviness in that thought, not fear, but the weight of something slipping gently out of reach. Normally, backward trajectory solutions collapse slowly. Errors accumulate predictably. But this collapse felt different, too fast, too early, too sensitive to even the smallest variations. It was as though the object had traveled through regions of space where gravitational influences were either too faint to leave a mark or arranged in patterns that don't align with known structures. Researchers re-ran the models hundreds of times, different integration methods, different gravitational maps, different galactic potentials, but the collapse persisted. You sense the unease that must have filled the quiet rooms where those simulations ran the hum of machines trying to calculate a truth that wasn't cooperating. Some astronomers wondered if the object had passed through voids, enormous cavities between star-forming regions where gravity thins out and records fade. Others wondered if it had traversed tidal tails from ancient galactic mergers paths shaped not by stars, but by dark matter streams. Dark matter leaves no fingerprints in the light, but it bends trajectories subtly, silently. You feel the subtlety of that possibility brushing against you, soft, cold, strangely elegant. Still, even dark matter could only explain so much. The collapse of the models came from something deeper. The trajectory lacked the gravitational scars expected from a long journey. Most interstellar objects bounced off something at some point. A star, a planet, a cluster, a drifting mass. Their paths carry bruises, slight tilts, bends, chaotic memories. 3IATLAS carried no bruises. Its path looked uneroded, unscarred, untouched, as though it had been moving through stillness rather than chaos. You imagine a traveler walking across a desert of untouched sand, leaving no footprints because the ground is too soft, too complete, too silent to hold them. Something about that imagining rests strangely inside you, a feeling that combines loneliness with beauty, a sense of age without decay. As the models continued failing, scientists began questioning their assumptions. Was the initial velocity wrong? Was the distance estimate off? Was the albedo skewing measurements? Were the available observations insufficient? Yet each recalibration returned the same strange truth. The simulations unraveled no matter what numbers they fed in. In private notes, a researcher wrote, "Reverse modeling fails beyond acceptable uncertainty range." Acceptable uncertainty, range a phrase designed to sound calm, even when it means something quietly alarming. The failure suggested not chaos, but consistency. A consistency that didn't fit the universe as currently modeled. You lie with that thought, letting its softness move through you like a passing shadow. Even stranger forward predictions also struggled. Simulating where the object would go after leaving the solar system should have been straightforward. But small instabilities appeared not because the object was behaving wildly, but because it behaved too cleanly. When motion is too clean, small uncertainties can grow large, like watching a perfectly still pendulum amplify the slightest breath of air. The models predicted the object leaving the solar system on a smooth hyperbolic arc, but tiny deviations created huge spreads over long periods, as if the object were slipping along a path where gravity lost some of its authority, not breaking physics, simply stretching it. You sense the vulnerability of those models' delicate nets thrown at something that refuses to be caught. The collapse of both backward and forward simulations left scientists in an unusual position, unable to say where the object came from and unable to say exactly where it would go. A traveler passing through the solar system, like a sentence missing its first word and its last. You imagine reading such a sentence, the meaning held together, not by grammar, but by emotion, intuition, a sense of presence. Some mysteries are structured that way, more felt than solved. The collapse of the models wasn't a failure of human knowledge. It was a reminder of how large the unknown remains. The universe rarely reveals itself through certainty. More often, it speaks through the places where certainty dissolves. You feel that dissolution in the dark around you, gentle, quiet, almost calming. Astronomers began discussing new possibilities. Perhaps the object drifted from a stellar nursery where gravity is too weak to leave clear marks. Perhaps it wandered from the galactic halo. Perhaps its origin lies in a region shaped by phenomena we haven't yet charted. Not aliens, not structures, not engineered mysteries, just physics. We haven't learned how to listen to. Physics shaped by distances too great for human intuition. Physics shaped by pathways too soft for planets and stars to notice. Physics shaped by the quiet. You let that possibility bloom inside you like a soft exhale. The collapse of the models became in its own way a beacon, not warning, not danger, but invitation. An invitation to remember that the universe is not fully mapped. That the spaces between stars hold stories as gentle as dust and as ancient as silence. That some travelers move under rules our equations can touch, but not fully grasp. 3IATLAS drifted through our solar system like a reminder of how much remains unmeasured. Not a threat, not a puzzle screaming to be solved. A quiet visitor carrying the fingerprint of places we have not yet learned to imagine. You lie there, letting that quiet expand, feeling the edges of your thoughts soften into the same uncharted calm. A model collapses, a truth slips away. And in that slip, the universe reveals something deeper. There are paths shaped not by what we know, but by what waits in the silence beyond knowing. You rest in that silence, now steady as breath. The collapse of the models leaves a quiet opening inside you, like the soft unfurling of space where certainty once lived. You can feel that opening now, not empty, not cold, but expectant, as if something in the dark has been waiting for this silence to finally be heard. And into that silence comes the faintest rhythm. Astronomers noticed it first in the light, a small oscillation in brightness that shouldn't have existed, not with the object's smooth rotation, not with its quiet surface, not with its behavior so far. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't chaotic, it was simply present. A pulse, soft, faint, regular enough to follow, irregular enough to trouble the mind. You imagine holding a lantern far across a field, watching its glow shift ever so slightly with each slow step of someone you cannot see. That's how the brightness of 3IATLAS behaved, a glimmer changing gently, as though something inside the object, or upon it, or around it, responded to sunlight with a pattern it couldn't quite hide. NASA's photometric readings showed a curve that felt almost alive in its subtlety. Not biological, not artificial, just alive in the way the ocean breathes under the moon, a quiet rhythmic swelling. You feel that rhythm moving through your own breath, now aligning with you in a way that feels unforced, natural, almost soothing. Brightness curves usually reveal rotation or surface irregularity. We've already seen its rotation too calm, too cohesive. We've already seen its surface too neutral, too consistent. So why did the light pulse? The amplitude was tiny, just enough to catch a trained eye, just enough to suggest a structured interaction with sunlight. Light curves don't whisper unless something is shaping the whisper. You let that whisper drift softly into the space around you. Some astronomers suspected the oscillation might be harmonic, a resonance created by the angle of sunlight with respect to the object's form. But the pulse didn't match the rotation period. It didn't match the phase angle. It didn't match scattering predictions. The rhythm lived outside the expected geometry, a deviation with a voice of its own. You imagine a bell struck so lightly that no sound is heard, but the vibration still moves through the air, perceived not by ears, but by a deeper, quieter sense. That was the feeling 3IATLAS gave. The brightness dipped and rose with a cadence that grew clearer across nights of observation. Not perfectly periodic, just periodic enough to suggest pattern. Not loud, just steady enough to suggest intention, even though scientists avoided such language carefully. Intent is a word no astronomer uses without hesitation. Pattern is allowed. Structure is allowed. But this pattern did not behave like physical structure. It behaved like response. Even imagining that possibility, you feel your breath deepen, not out of alarm, but out of recognition that the universe holds subtleties far greater than fear. ESA's teams analyzed the light curve for rotational aliasing, the phenomenon where brightness appears to pulse due to misread spin frequencies. But aliasing did not explain the gentle modulation. It wasn't a strobe effect. It wasn't an artifact. It was consistent across instruments, a whisper that crossed telescopes, a whisper that didn't belong to noise. You imagine this whisper stretching across millions of kilometers, reaching you, not through sound, but through a soft insistence in the light, the oldest messenger the universe knows. Some astronomers looked deeper, examining the curve's harmonics. There were traces of secondary frequencies, subtle echoes of the primary pulse. Too faint for conclusions, too persistent to ignore. Interference patterns, someone suggested. Sunlight reflecting off multiple surfaces. But the object had no known outgassed veil, no dust, no reflective halos. The whisper had nothing to bounce off except the object itself. You feel a shiver of curiosity at that realization, gentle, warm like a thought forming behind your ribs. Another idea surfaced. Could the oscillation be thermal? Materials expand and contract under heat. Some do so rhythmically when subjected to cyclical illumination. But this object heated gently uniformly, without the jagged spikes of thermal stress. And the rhythm did not match the heating period. So what was left? A modulation in reflectance so subtle, it could only emerge from something deeper than surface texture. Maybe small-scale variations, hidden beneath a protective mantle. Maybe mineral structures aligned in patterns unknown to terrestrial geology. Maybe crystalline arrangements shaped not by humans, not by intention, but by cosmic time itself. Time creates structures we do not yet have words for. You lie there, letting that thought move through you, like a low tide rolling through a quiet harbor. Still the whisper persisted. When plotted over several nights, the brightness curve resembled a breath, rising softly, falling softly, holding steady for a moment, then drifting again. A breath not aligned with rotation, not aligned with shape, not aligned with thermal cycles. Something else. A researcher described it as photometric modulation inconsistent with known physical drivers. The phrase is cold, but the truth beneath it is warm in its mystery. The universe rarely offers patterns without purpose, even if the purpose is unknown. Not intention, not communication, just phenomena shaped by rules we haven't learned yet. You imagine the object responding to sunlight the way water responds to wind, creating ripples that are not messages but still carry a kind of delicate order. Nothing alive, nothing engineered, just the universe expressing itself through matter. You breathe with that image, feeling your own pulse align with the quiet oscillation. The whisper in the light curves raised another question. Why now? Some oscillations grew slightly stronger as the object approached perihelion, the moment of closest passage to the sun. Not enough to suggest blooming activity, just enough to suggest responsiveness. As if warmth stirred something faint beneath the surface, a component that didn't sublimate, didn't flare, but shifted just enough to alter reflectance in fragile waves. The whisper grew louder, not in brightness but in clarity. Astronomers examined polarization data, hoping to read the angles at which light bounced from the object. Polarization reveals textures too small to see directly. It tells stories about grains, layers, patterns. The data revealed polarization just outside, expected ranges, not chaotic, not extreme, simply a little too organized for comfort. Organized neutrality. That phrase settles inside you with a strange softness, as if the object were holding itself in a state of quiet discipline. Perhaps it was shaped by magnetic fields long ago. Perhaps it carried minerals aligned in ways unfamiliar to Earth. Perhaps its crystalline structures responded to sunlight with faint internal echoes. Crystals whisper when touched by light. They vibrate, they modulate, they resonate. Maybe this object was a kind of cosmic crystal, forged not in laboratories or factories, but in stellar nurseries, where matter takes forms guided by forces we barely understand. You feel an unexpected calm in that idea, the notion that the universe grows, wonders, without witnesses, sculptures made in darkness, to be seen only once by those lucky enough to look up at the right time. The whisper of the light curve continued, even as the object moved deeper into the solar system. The pulse shifted slightly, not faster, not larger, just altered, as if responding to the sun's changing angle, as if acknowledging the warmth, as if adjusting its breath. Not communication, not signaling, just interaction. Light touches it, it touches light back. You rest in that thought, letting your mind soften around it, the way sleep softens the edges of waking. The whisper isn't frightening. It isn't loud. It is simply present. The quiet truth of an object that moves, rotates, warms, and reflects according to rules written somewhere beyond our familiarity. An object that isn't trying to explain itself. An object that doesn't need to. An object that simply is, and in that being offers a small tremor of beauty. You breathe into that beauty, letting the rhythm settle into your chest. Some mysteries try to unsettle you. This one lays a hand on your shoulder gently, as if asking you to lean in a little closer. A whisper is not a warning, a whisper is an invitation. You feel yourself accepting that invitation, drifting deeper into the quiet curiosity the object has carried across light years, letting its soft pulse become part of the night around you. The whisper in the light curve still lingers inside you, carrying a gentle pulse that seems to drift between thought and breath. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't push or pull. It simply exists, a quiet presence in the vastness of space, the kind that reaches you softly through silence rather than spectacle. And as that rhythm settles deeper, another part of the story begins to unfold, not in the light, not in the surface, not in the spin, but in the simple fact of where the object chose to travel. Every interstellar visitor arrives on a path sculpted by chance. Gravity tosses them without care, sending them across star systems on chaotic, unpredictable journeys. Some pass so far from the sun that humans never see them. Some skim close enough for their tails to bloom like torches. Some slip silently between the planets unobserved. But 3IATLAS entered the solar system in a way that made astronomers pause, not dangerously close, not alarmingly aligned, just close enough close in the kind of way that made the distance feel strangely intimate. You imagine a stranger walking across a quiet street at night, not approaching you, not acknowledging you, yet passing just near enough that you feel the slight shift in the air as they move by. That was the sensation this object carried. Its trajectory brought it through the inner solar system at a distance that felt narrow for an interstellar traveler. Not a near-Earth hazard, not a threat, but close enough to make its presence unmistakable. NASA mapped its path with increasing precision. The lines on the chart curved through the planetary orbits with an elegance that felt deliberate, even though every scientist knew better than to use such a word. Objects from other star systems usually sweep through far outside Earth's orbital region, pulled only slightly by the sun. But this one wandered inward, not deeply, just enough to brush the edges of familiarity. You feel that almost closeness, like a soft wind stirring across your skin, present but gentle, the sort of nearness that doesn't intrude but can't be ignored. The geometry of its approach was subtle. The inclination of its orbit cut across the solar system at an angle that avoided major planets, yet threaded the space between their orbits in a way that seemed improbably clean. Not engineered, not precise, just oddly elegant. You picture a bird migrating across the sky, choosing a path that avoids mountains without needing to know they exist. Not intellect instinct, not design consequence, not intention survival. 3IATLAS moved with that kind of effortless clarity. Its closest approach to the sun was nearer than most interstellar objects ever dare to drift. Yet it didn't show the agitation of a body disturbed by heat. No flares of activity, no sudden brightening, no shedding of fragments. It moved through warmth, the way a shadow moves through light, touched but unbroken. As it slipped inward, its heliocentric distance shrank to numbers that felt eerie when compared to expectations. Interstellar travelers usually take wide, sweeping arcs. This one cut closer, narrower, like a needle passing through the eye of cosmic fabric. The closer it came, the more observational arcs refined its position, and the more scientists realized how unusually clean the approach was. No sharp deflection from Jupiter, no gravitational wobble caused by planetary perturbations, no chaotic signatures in its predicted pathway. A visitor crossing a crowded system without touching a single chair. You let that image sink into you, someone walking through a room full of fragile glass, without making anything tremble. Distance is supposed to create safety. But sometimes closeness reveals gentleness rather than danger. And this closeness was gentle in a way no one expected. As the object crossed the plane of the planets, the sunlight touched it more directly. Its brightness increased only slightly, not flaring, just rising with the calm acceptance of something accustomed to warmth. Astronomers noted the serene steadiness, no significant activity near perihelion, no dust emission detected, no structural disturbance. You feel the serenity of that phrase in your chest, an object so composed that not even a star unsettled it. The distance between the object and Earth was never enough to cause concern, yet the psychological closeness was undeniable. Something from another star system passing by in silence at a proximity rare enough to be a once-in-a-lifetime observation. It made people feel watched, not in fear, but in awareness. A reminder that humans are not alone in moving through space. Not alone in drifting. Not alone in wandering. Not alone in being shaped by forces they cannot see. Objects like this do not arrive often. They do not repeat. They do not announce themselves. They simply pass, one moment crossing interstellar emptiness, the next weaving through sunlight with quiet familiarity. You feel that familiarity now, the kind that comes not from recognition, but from a sense that something foreign can still feel strangely close to you. The sun's gravity should have pulled the object into a sharper curve, but it resisted that pull with the same calm disagreement it had shown earlier, not defying the star, just drifting through the gravitational field with moderation. The closeness revealed something else too. Its interaction with solar radiation changed slightly. Not enough to cause alarm, just enough to make its distance feel even more intimate, like sunlight brushing gently across the skin of a traveler who had only known distant stars. The warmth didn't wake it, didn't stir hidden jets, didn't crack its surface. It simply warmed without reaction, a guest who enters your home and stands quietly by the window, taking in the room without asking for anything. Some astronomers describe the object's passage as quietly threading the inner system. Others considered it a low-interaction transit. But beneath the technical phrasing rested something more human, a sense that the object came closer than it needed to, and yet left less disturbance than anyone expected. You imagine a comet that never glows, a stone that never cracks, a traveler who moves through a city without leaving footprints in the dust. Closeness without impact, presence without weight, motion without consequence. As the object rounded the sun and began drifting outward again, the distance between it and Earth grew larger. But the psychological closeness remained like a memory that refuses to fade because it arrived too softly to forget. The geometry of its exit mirrored the elegance of its entrance, smooth, stable, untroubled. Astronomers followed the retreating coordinates with the same reverence they had felt on its approach. And through all of it, the object never acted like something encountering a star for the first time. It behaved like something that had passed near stars before many times long enough to learn the gentle art of slipping by without disturbance. You breathe into that thought, the idea of an ancient traveler knowing how to move through a crowded system without waking anything. Not a danger, not a warning, just a presence. A presence that came close enough for you to feel something strange and quiet. A reminder that the universe is always passing by, always drifting near, always brushing against your existence, even when you cannot see it. The distance felt too close, not because the object approached Earth dangerously, but because it approached your awareness gently, leaving a soft imprint of wonder, a closeness that makes you feel less alone in the dark. You lie with that awareness now, letting its warmth soak into you, the way sunlight must have soaked gently into the traveler as it curved past the star at the center of our world. A visitor passing so near, yet touching nothing. A moment of cosmic proximity that left no mark on the planets, but left a small lingering mark inside you. The closeness of the object still lingers inside you, like the warmth of a candle flame, long after it has been blown out. You feel the softness of its passing, the way it curved through the solar system without friction, without noise, without leaving anything but a quiet impression upon those who watched it drift by. But beneath that quiet, something else was forming, not in space, but in the rooms where scientists gathered to speak privately about what they had seen. Fear, not the fear that stirs alarm bells or wakes cities, not the kind that builds headlines or fuels speculation. This was a softer kind, a fear that whispers beneath certainty, a fear that appears only when something touches the limits of what you know. You sense that fear now, not sharp, not cold, but delicate, like the tremor in a voice that usually speaks with confidence. Scientists do not panic easily. They are trained to distrust emotion, to hold steady in front of the unknown. But they also know when a mystery has become too large for the existing boundaries. With 3IATLAS, the boundaries felt unusually thin. Behind closed doors, researchers began to share the questions they couldn't publish, the quiet uncertainties, the subtle discomforts, the strange shapes forming in their interpretations. You imagine a long table surrounded by tired people, each one staring at the same data, yet feeling something slightly different in the pit of their stomach. Not dread, not excitement, something much quieter than both. A confusion too soft to name. One scientist began by admitting what no one wanted to say in the official reports. The data doesn't fit any known natural templates. That sentence sits heavily inside you, not because it implies the dramatic, but because it implies the fragile, the possibility that human maps of the universe are missing something essential. You imagine the moment that sentence fell into the room, the stillness, the scratch of pen against paper, the breath someone held without realizing, the small, involuntary silence that follows whenever something true and uncomfortable enters the air. The fear in that room didn't come from imagining aliens or impossible structures. Scientists don't fear such things. They fear something far simpler, not knowing what question to ask next. Every unexplained observation can be investigated. Every mystery can be framed. But what do you do when the object refuses to fit into any frame at all? You feel the echo of that question inside yourself, a space opening in the mind where answers cannot yet grow. Another scientist quietly mentioned that the motion of the object seemed too moderated for conventional materials. Again, this wasn't a claim of intention, but an admission that the physical explanations were treading water. Moderation without reason is unsettling. It suggests either missing physics or incomplete understanding. Neither is comforting in a field built on precision. You imagine how they must have felt standing at the edge of a map that had always seemed complete, realizing the edges may have been drawn too soon. Later, someone pointed to the pristine rotation and the even surface reflectance. Someone else added the faint photometric whisper. Someone else mentioned the untraceable origin. Piece by piece, the puzzle laid itself bare in the middle of the room. But instead of forming a picture, it formed a silence. You feel that silence now, soft, heavy, lingering like fog settling across a landscape at dusk. Another scientist finally said what everyone else had been circling. It's behaving as if it has been in a low interaction environment for a very long time. A low interaction environment, a poetic term for places in the galaxy where nothing touches anything, where dust is rare and gravity is diffuse, where an object could drift for millions of years without scars. The room didn't fear the object. It feared the vastness behind that idea, the vastness where silence reigns, the vastness where models collapse, the vastness where even memory fades. A place so empty that the object became smooth simply by passing through it. You sense that emptiness, not as loneliness, but as an expanse too large to comprehend an ocean of nothing that still shapes everything. As they spoke, the tone in the room shifted again. These were people who understood how fragile human definitions of the universe truly are. They knew that every new visitor from the stars carried within it the potential to undo something they believed was stable. And this visitor, with its quiet behavior and impossible moderation, seemed to be undoing more than usual. Not violently, not abruptly, just gently, the way a soft wave slowly erases footprints in the sand. Someone whispered, perhaps not literally, but in the way a quiet voice changes the air. If we can't classify it, What does that say about the universe we think we understand? You feel that whisper deep inside your chest. Science is not frightened of the unknown. Science is frightened of misunderstanding it. A misinterpreted object can derail missions, break predictions, and warp theories. Not because the object is wrong, but because the assumptions wrapped around it fall apart. You imagine those assumptions breaking one thread at a time as the object drifted through sunlight. Rotation shouldn't be that smooth. Brightness shouldn't be that soft. Surface shouldn't be that neutral. Trajectory shouldn't be that clean. Models shouldn't collapse that early. Light curves shouldn't whisper. Yet all of these things happen quietly, one after another, like a sequence of gentle taps on a door no one expected to be opened. Behind that door lay not danger, but humility. Humility so deep that it resembled fear. Not fear of the object, fear of the questions it carried inside its silence. You imagine them realizing for the first time that this visitor might not be strange because it is unusual, but because human instruments are still too young to read its story fully. And this is the fear that scientists rarely talk about publicly, the fear of being too small, too early in the cosmic timeline, too limited in knowledge, too fragile in our attempts to understand the universe. Yet something beautiful rests inside that fear, the recognition that there is more to know, more to listen to, more to imagine, more to witness. You feel that beauty settling inside you now, warm and steady. Behind the closed doors of observatories across the world, the scientists did not speak of panic. They spoke of caution, curiosity, humility, and a quiet ache that comes from staring into something so gentle, yet so vast that your mind cannot hold its edges. One scientist wrote in a private note later leaked anonymously, "This object is not alarming. What alarms me is how soft the unknown can be." You feel that line run through you like a slow, deep breath. The unknown does not always announce itself with fire. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it drifts. Sometimes it passes close enough to feel intimate without ever revealing its face. 3IATLAS. Was that kind of unknown a visitor whose silence made humans listen more carefully than noise ever could? You rest in that silence now, feeling the same fragile awe those scientists felt behind closed doors. A fear that doesn't demand running. A fear that asks you to stay. A fear that is at its core curiosity, wearing a softer coat. A reminder that the universe is enormous, not because it is violent, but because it is quiet. And in that quiet, you find yourself breathing more gently, sensing the weight of something ancient settling around you like night. The soft fear that lived behind closed doors still lingers in you, the kind that doesn't spike the pulse, but rests gently beneath thought, shaping the quiet in ways you barely notice. You feel how every part of the story so far has been leading towards something deeper, something not loud or dramatic, but quietly transformative. And inside those rooms where scientists gathered, something began to shift. Not in the data, not in the models, not in the numbers glowing across their screens, but in the questions. Questions can change a room the way a single candle changes the darkness. Not by flooding it with light, but by revealing how much of the darkness was illusion all along. You sense that shift now, as if you had been sitting there yourself, watching the atmosphere thicken with awareness. At first, the team asked predictable questions, the kind anyone trained in astrophysics would ask. Could the reflectance be miscalculated? Could the rotation be misread? Could noise masquerade as pattern? Could thermal data be skewed? But each of those questions dissolved softly, answered by the same calm truth. They had already seen the data was consistent across observatories, across instruments, across nights. So the questions changed. One scientist finally asked what no one wanted to ask first. What if this object represents something about interstellar space we haven't modeled yet? A quiet move through the room, not the silence of fear, but the silence of possibility. You know that feeling. The moment when the question itself becomes larger than the answers that came before it. The kind of question that doesn't arrive often. The kind that makes everyone sit a little straighter. The kind that changes the shape of the room. Someone else added gently, "What if we've underestimated what silence can do to matter over long distances?" Another whisper across the air, another shift. You imagine how the scientists must have looked at each other, not with alarm, but with a dawning understanding that the usual assumptions might not be enough anymore. 3IATLAS had already challenged rotation models, surface models, trajectory, predictions, photometric behavior, and backward reconstruction. What if all these anomalies weren't anomalies at all? What if they were symptoms of physics written in regions of the galaxy? Humans have never mapped. You feel the spaciousness of that idea move through you like a curtain being pulled back from a window you never realized was there. Questions continued to rise, each one softer and more transformative than the last. What if this is normal somewhere else? What if our sample size of interstellar objects has been too small to understand what normal means? What if we've built our expectations around a universe that isn't finished, revealing itself? Each question dissolved a little more of the fear, replacing it with something gentler. Curiosity, rooted in humility, the kind that brings scientists closer together rather than pushing them towards certainty. You feel that shift within yourself too. The way an unsettling thought can become comforting once you stop trying to solve it and simply allow it to be part of your understanding. Another scientist spoke, voice quiet but steady. The problem may not be the object. The problem may be our language. Language tries to compress infinity into words. It tries to place boundaries around something boundless. It tries to carve truth into shapes the human mind can hold. But some truths resist shaping. You imagine a hand trying to grasp smoke, how the smoke slips through the fingers, not to escape, but because it was never meant to be held that way. The object behaved like that smoke. The room grew warmer with that realization. Fear softened into contemplation. Contemplation softened into acceptance. Someone suggested the object might belong to a class of interstellar bodies, yet to be defined objects shaped by conditions the solar system has never experienced. You feel the tenderness of that idea, as if naming the unknown gently makes it less daunting. Maybe another scientist said this is what happens when something drifts for tens of millions of years through regions with almost no gravitational interactions at all. A soft murmur rippled across the room, the sound of people discovering that a mystery can become less frightening once they begin imagining the story behind it. You lie there, absorbing that feeling. Not answers, not clarity, just the steady comfort of a question that expands the world rather than shrinking it. Someone else raised another possibility. What if interstellar space is far more diverse than we assumed? What if we've sampled only the loudest objects so far? The bright, the active, the chaotic. And this is the quiet majority we've never seen. Quiet majority. The phrase rests inside you like a warm stone, simple weighted true. Maybe 3IATLAS wasn't strange. Maybe everything else observed so far had been the exceptions. Maybe this visitor was not a rarity, but a reminder of how incomplete human sampling has been. Space is wide, time is ancient, silence is abundant. Most of what drifts between stars may very well be shaped by that silence. You feel a softness spreading through your thoughts, the kind of softness that accompanies understanding. The questions continued to change. What if its neutrality is its story? What if its calmness is not an anomaly, but a clue? What if the object is telling us about a part of the universe that is too quiet for us to detect directly? These were not wild guesses. They were invitations. Invitations to widen the map, to reimagine the pathways between stars, to consider that the galaxy may be filled with travelers shaped by regions so calm that their very existence becomes an archive of stillness. You imagine such a region, a vast corridor of quiet, where gravity loosens its grip, where dust becomes sparse, where matter drifts in near-perfect equilibrium. A place where an object could smooth itself over eons, learning not through force, but through time. A place where a visitor like 3IATLAS could be born. You feel that imagined place inside you now, cold but gentle, distant but real. A reminder that the universe is full of spaces humans have never touched. Yet those spaces still touch you through the objects that wander into your sky. The final question in the room came from someone who had been silent the entire time. Someone who leaned back in their chair, exhaled softly, and said, "What if we stop trying to classify it and start listening to it? Not listening for messages, not listening for signals. Listening the way you listen to wind through trees, not for meaning, but for presence." You feel that presence now, the quiet certainty that the universe often speaks, not through explanations, but through the gentle inconsistencies that pull you closer to wonder. The room did not fill with conclusions. It filled with awareness. Awareness that the unknown can be soft. Awareness that understanding begins not with answers, but with questions that shift the air. You rest in that awareness, letting it settle across your mind like a blanket of night. These were the questions that changed the room. And slowly they changed something inside you as well. Not fear, not confusion, something quieter. A widening, a gentle recognition that the universe is not finished teaching you how to listen. The questions that change the room still echo inside you. Gentle, widening questions that don't demand answers, only presence. You feel how each one opened the world a little more, as if every uncertainty revealed a new window in a house you thought you knew. But rooms like that don't stay quiet forever. Sooner or later, someone asks the question no one wants to say. A question shaped not by fear, not by hope, but by the simple gravity of the unknown. And in one of those rooms, when the hour had grown late and the coffee had gone cold, a scientist finally leaned back in their chair, exhaled softly, and said the theory everyone had been circling, but no one wanted to claim. What if we're looking at physics we don't have the language for yet? You feel that sentence settle into you the way dusk settles into a valley, slowly, evenly, with a weight that is soft but undeniable. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even an idea. It was an admission that the universe might still hold behaviors so subtle that human equations haven't grown sensitive enough to describe them. Not breaking physics, not rewriting laws, just revealing corners of those laws humans haven't illuminated. You imagine the way the room might have held that silence, a calm, steady awareness that the simplest theory can be the hardest one to accept. Another scientist added with a quiet voice, "Maybe this is an example of low-force physics we never get to observe locally. Low-force physics interactions so faint they don't appear inside a solar system filled with heat light, gravity, and dust. Interactions so subtle they only shape objects wandering through emptiness for millions of years." You sense how this idea is both comforting and overwhelming. Comforting because it remains within nature, overwhelming because it lies beyond comprehension. The theory grew not from excitement, but from necessity. Rotation too smooth, surface too neutral, trajectory too clean, motion too moderated, light curve too gentle, origins untraceable, models collapsing early. All these pieces pointed towards something softer than chaos, quieter than force, something shaped not by disruption, but by the absence of it. A physics of silence. You let that phrase drift through your thoughts. A physics that operates only where noise is absent, where dust is rare, where light rarely touches anything. A physics that requires stillness so complete that only interstellar wanderers can carry its signature. Someone else in the meeting whispered, "What if this object is simply behaving the way matter behaves when it has been alone for too long?" Alone for too long, the words rest inside you with a melancholy beauty, like a melody played on a single instrument in a quiet hall. In solitude, matter finds equilibrium. In slow time, it finds balance. In silence, it finds forms that human instruments rarely see. Another scientist shifted in their seat and said softly, "Maybe this is what a perfectly undisturbed object looks like. Perfectly undisturbed, not carved by collisions, not scarred by dust, not cracked by heating cycles, not tilted by gravitational tides, just matter in its patient ancient form." You feel the gentleness of that possibility, that the object isn't unusual, Humanity is simply unacquainted with calm that deep. Still, there was a theory deeper than that, one that no one wanted to say, one that hovered like smoke above the table, one that felt too large for the room. What if the object is interacting with something we can't measure yet? Not dark matter, not exotic particles, not engineered technology. Something quieter, something natural, something woven into the universe, but so faint it only reveals itself to travelers untouched by noise. You imagine forces that don't push or pull but guide, like the way deep ocean currents move across the planet without disturbing the surface. Quiet but powerful, invisible but undeniable. A scientist finally murmured, "There could be long-range, low-frequency phenomena in interstellar space we haven't observed. Long-range, low-frequency, invisible, quiet. Phenomena that don't appear inside crowded systems. Phenomena that require solitude to function. Phenomena that leave signatures only on objects that have drifted long enough to be shaped by them." The room didn't erupt in discussion. It softened the way a room softens when truth becomes too large to speak above a whisper. You sense that softness now expanding inside your chest. Another scientist eventually spoke again. "We are assuming force requires strength. But what if some forces require time? A force of time. Not pushing, not pulling. Just accumulating shaping matter, gently, slowly, invisibly." You imagine such a force touching 3IATLAS across millions of years, smoothing its rough edges, balancing its spin, moderating its path, whispering through its light curve. Not intention, not design, just the natural consequence of time spent in pure stillness. Yet the deepest theory still remained unsaid. One person finally voiced it quietly, carefully, not because it was frightening, but because it was fragile. What if the universe is more complex than our instruments allow us to perceive? And this object is the first time we've brushed against that complexity. You feel something and you respond not in fear, but in recognition. Humans understand the universe through tools, through detections, through patterns. But tools are young. Patterns are limited. Understanding grows slowly. What if this object isn't strange? What if it's ordinary in a domain human eyes cannot yet see clearly? The theory that no one wanted to claim wasn't a theory of aliens or artificiality. It was something much simpler and much heavier. We are early in our science, early in our understanding, early in our ability to feel the subtleties of the universe. 3IATLAS did not break physics. It revealed where physics is still unfinished. You lie with that realization, calm, humbled, held gently by the thought that being early is not a flaw, it is an invitation to imagine, to listen, to observe, to grow. In that quiet room, the scientists didn't claim the theory. They held it, lightly, with respect, with caution, with wonder. An unclaimed theory, not because it was wrong, but because it was too large for any single person to own. A theory that rested in the space between them, the way the object itself rested in the space between stars, calm, ancient, unhurried. The theory that no one wanted to claim became the heart of the mystery, a reminder that the universe does not rush to make sense. It waits for you to catch up. You rest in that pace now, carried by the softness of a truth too gentle to be frightening, a truth that feels like breathing deeper than you meant to, a truth that feels like wonder. The theory no one wanted to claim still rests gently inside you, a quiet reminder that being early in the universe carries both wonder and humility. You feel the weightless truth of it, the way it softens the edges of fear and replaces it with something slower, deeper, more patient. And somewhere in that patience, something else begins to unfold. Not a revelation, not a discovery, just a moment when everything around the mystery becomes quiet. Every observation has an ending. Every story in astronomy has a point where the object drifts too far, grows too faint, slips too deep into the dark for instruments to follow. 3IATLAS reached that point with the same calmness it carried through the rest of its journey. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just subtly, the way twilight fades into night, so smoothly, you don't notice the moment when the last trace of light disappears. You feel that same fading now, a soft dimming around the memory of all the data, the rotation curves, the whispering brightness, the moderated path, the surface neutrality, the untraceable origin. All of it slowly dissolving into quiet. As the object moved outward after its closest approach, telescopes tracked it with increasing difficulty. It dimmed in a way that wasn't abrupt, but simply natural, like watching a lantern drift farther across a field until its glow blends with the night. One by one, observatories passed the object to the next, Hawaii to Chile, Chile to the Canary Islands, the Canaries to the deep northern sites, each catching a few more faint readings before losing it beyond the reach of their mirrors. You imagine the soft handoff of data between teams, like offering a delicate object from palm to palm before it becomes too small to hold. NASA recorded its last confident observations as the signal dropped below noise thresholds. The brightness curve flattened into the background. The whisper vanished. The motion became guesswork, and a hush settled across the inner circles of researchers, not the hush of fear, but the hush of closure. A visitor had come. A visitor had left. A visitor would not be seen again. You feel that hush inside you, as if the universe itself were pausing for breath. There is a moment near the end of every observation arc when astronomers stop talking about what they're seeing and begin talking about what they've seen. The tense shifts. Verbs soften. Sentences grow slower, more reflective. It becomes less about science, more about memory. That moment arrived quietly for 3IATLAS. Screens filled with faint scatter, graphs smoothed, numbers lost precision. The object once so present became a sequence of diminishing pixels. One scientist wrote privately, "We're witnessing its disappearance." The word disappearance didn't mean anything dramatic. It meant the object had moved beyond the limits of human sight, slipping away into the same unknown it emerged from. You imagine that disappearance as a soft, backward step through a doorway, the figure fading, not because it chose to hide, but because distance itself became the curtain. As it left, something unexpected occurred. The quiet in the rooms grew deeper, as if the mystery had expanded rather than vanished. Sometimes the unknown becomes larger when the evidence becomes faint. You feel that paradox settling around you, the idea that the less you can see, the more your mind tries to reach. Astronomers don't often admit to emotion in their work, but behind closed doors, several shared a sentiment that hadn't appeared earlier. I didn't expect to miss it. A visitor from another star, silent, unassuming, offering nothing more than small anomalies and gentle defiance, had somehow become a presence in their lives, a presence that now drifted beyond reach. You feel that absence, like an empty seat beside you. Not painful, just quietly noticeable. A few tried to catch one last glimpse, long exposures, stack frames, enhanced filtering. But the sky refused to yield more. The universe sometimes closes doors kindly. As the object receded into the deep, dark conversations among the teams grew softer. Even disagreements faded, replaced by a kind of contemplative unity. They weren't arguing physics anymore, they were acknowledging something quieter, that they had witnessed something rare, something delicate, something that came into their world without explanation or warning, a presence that reminded them of how much the sky still holds. You sense a similar quiet inside yourself, a soft clarity that often arrives only when noise leaves. Some scientists gathered informally in hallways or at windows overlooking the night sky. They spoke not of equations, but of feelings, the kind that never enter papers or conferences. One said it makes the universe feel both larger and gentler. Another, I thought I wanted answers. Now I think I just wanted to witness it. Another, there's something peaceful about not knowing. You breathe into those words, letting them move through you, like warm air drifting across a cold room. Eventually the emails stopped. The meetings ended. The urgency faded. All that remained was a faint trail of data, a few models broken in all the right places, and a memory of a visitor who slipped past the sun like a shadow that never formed. This was the moment everything quieted, the moment when the object's presence gave way to reflection, when the universe grew still enough for humans to hear themselves think. And the thoughts that rose were softer than expected. Not fear, not frustration, something like gratitude. Gratitude for witnessing a piece of the galaxy's vastness wander close enough to touch human imagination. Gratitude for being reminded that the cosmos is not hostile, only immense. Gratitude for the humbling truth that silence can be as instructive as sound. You lie there now, letting that gratitude drift through you, gentle, spacious, steady. In that quiet, you realize something the scientists realized as well. The moment an object disappears is not the moment its influence ends. Sometimes the absence reveals more than the presence ever could. A traveler passed through your sky. It offered no answers. It asked no questions. It simply moved through sunlight and darkness with the ease of something older than every word humans have invented. And in its leaving, it left a shape in your thoughts, a shape not of fear, but of wonder, a shape that feels like the universe inhaling, a shape that feels like possibility. You rest in that possibility now the way the scientists rested, when the last signal faded, not empty-handed, but holding a quiet they didn't know they needed. The quiet of its disappearance still rests inside you, like the lingering warmth of a hand once placed gently on your shoulder. You can feel that warmth even now, a presence fading, yet somehow becoming more real as it drifts into memory. This is the part of a cosmic story that no telescope can measure. The part left behind after the signals fade, after the numbers flatten, after the last observation dissolves into noise. The echo, not a sound, but an impression. Not evidence, but resonance. A kind of soft afterglow that doesn't belong to the object anymore but to you. You lie in that afterglow now, letting it settle around your mind with the same small tenderness the object carried while passing through the solar system. NASA archived the final measurements quietly. Coordinates, brightness, uncertainties. A thin trail of digits marking the last known position of a traveler already sliding into the dark. Once saved, the data became something different, no longer a living signal, but a memory sealed inside a file. Human knowledge often ends that way first, a discovery, then a discussion, then a line in an archive, then a soft echo lingering in those who paid attention. You feel that echo filling the edges of your awareness, gentle, steady, almost like breath. Scientists returned to their normal work. Papers were drafted. Conferences prepared, arguments softened, new objects demanded attention, life moved on. Yet something remained in them, the same thing that remains in you now, a sense that you had witnessed something subtle and rare, something that didn't arrive with noise but with presence, something that didn't warn, didn't glow, didn't break, didn't shine, something that simply was, and in its simplicity, shifted the room around it. You feel that shift, like a quiet realignment inside your thoughts. No tension, no fear, just a gentle acceptance that the universe is larger, calmer, more mysterious than you had imagined. Weeks after the object vanished from all instruments, one scientist was asked in an interview how they felt about its departure. Scientists are not used to answering questions about feelings. But after a long pause, they said something that stayed with those who heard it. It reminded me that the universe is allowed to be quiet. Quiet. You breathe into that word, feeling its weight, its softness, its permission. Not every mystery is loud. Not every question is urgent. Not every visitor is here to reveal anything at all. Some are here to remind you that stillness holds truths of its own. The echo of 3IATLAS is that reminder, not the details of its rotation, not the whisper in its brightness, not the moderation in its path, not the collapse of models or the untraceable origin, but the simple fact that something can drift through your world without disturbing it, yet still leave you changed. That kind of quiet influence is rare. You feel its rarity now, the way certain memories settle in your heart, not because of what happened, but because of how softly they occurred. Some evenings, long after the data had been filed away, a few researchers would look up at the night sky from their observatories, not searching, not tracking, just remembering the faint glimmer of a visitor that passed with more gentleness than explanation. You imagine them standing under that sky, silent, reflective, feeling a private echo that doesn't belong to science or equations, but to being human in the presence of something ancient. Something that traveled farther than imagination, yet slipped by quietly enough to feel like a dream. You breathe more slowly as that idea moves through you. The idea that wonder doesn't always need answers, and that curiosity can be its own form of comfort. There's a moment usually unnoticed when a mystery stops being a phenomenon and becomes a companion. A moment when the data ends, but the feeling does not. That moment is here with you now. As 3IATLAS drifts farther beyond planets, beyond the heliosphere, beyond even the last reach of solar gravity, it becomes something the solar system will never touch again. A wanderer returning to the quiet that shaped it. A traveler slipping gently back into the long, dark corridors between stars. A presence leaving you with only one thing, its echo. Not a warning, not a riddle, not a message. Just the quiet awareness that the universe is full of travelers you will never see, full of calm. You will never hear, full of stories that do not need to be understood to be felt. The echo inside you grows softer, still, no longer a question, no longer a tension, just an open space where the unknown rests peacefully. A space shaped by curiosity, a space shaped by humility, a space shaped by quiet. NASA's final report on the object ends with a simple sentence: further observations not possible. 3 words that look like closure, but you know now that closure is not the end of wonder. It is the beginning of reflection. A reflection that stretches out gently inside you, the way starlight stretches across the night. You feel that reflection deep within, slow, serene, steady, drawing you closer to rest. The echo of the object isn't loud enough to disturb sleep. It's soft enough to cradle it, soft enough to guide you toward the place where thought dissolves, soft enough to carry you across the threshold between waking and dreaming, soft enough to remind you that the universe is always moving, always drifting, always whispering through the quiet objects that pass unnoticed by most. But not by you. You heard its whisper. You felt its presence. And now you feel the echo, settling like gentle dust across your mind. A final warmth washes through you, as if the traveler somewhere deep beyond the sun's reach passed close enough to brush your thoughts one last time. No message, no meaning, just presence. A presence that feels like a hand resting lightly on your chest, steadying your breath, easing your thoughts, guiding you toward the softness, waiting on the other side of consciousness. You let that softness sink into you, carrying you gently downward, as though gravity itself had learned how to cradle instead of pull. 3IATLAS continues into the dark, leaving behind no trace in the sky, only the echo that remains in you. An echo made of wonder, an echo made of quiet, an echo made of the simple recognition that the universe is allowed to be soft. You rest in that softness now. You rest in that quiet. You rest in that echo. And the night closes around you like a warm, familiar blanket.